Hello. So in today's video, I want to talk more on the psychology side of money and investing rather than the technicalities of things like investing and compounding and stuff. Because the reality is that when we hit things like downturns, or you make decisions to save or to spend, or whether to invest it here, there, or everywhere, and things like your risk parameters, your psychology, your risk appetite, and your risk capacity can play just as big of a role as the amount that you are able to invest every month. So when it comes to making certain spending decisions, I like to have a little phrase or something that will try and help me come up with a decision about whether or not I should spend the money. Be this things like when I improved the garden last year, or little things like even takeaways, for example. So the first thing I want to talk about is the so-called Anne Boleyn effect, which is not a thing in finance. It's entirely something that I've made for myself. Basically, there's a story where Anne Boleyn had this advisor that she absolutely loved, and as a thank you for all of the great advice that she was given, she decided to gift this person this really bespoke desk. And this advisor decided that after they got such a great desk, it's like, well, I can't work on this desk without a great chair and better, more expensive pens and stuff. And then they need better robes to sit in it properly. And they redid their office and redid their entire house. And their spending basically spiraled out of control from this one gift. It actually bankrupted their entire family. So it's the so-called hedonic treadmill effect of like you make a bit more money, you feel like you can spend a bit more money here, but when you spend money there, it makes you want to spend more money in different places. So you want to be conscious that when you're making a purchase decision, you want to make sure that you're only making that decision. You want to think about whether or not this will lead to you making other decisions, and whether or not it's worth it as a whole package rather than just this one decision. The second saying is that when the tide goes out, you find out who's been swimming naked. And this is the basic idea of you could leverage yourself up to the hilt and make massive, massive returns. But the reality is that if there's pullbacks or if there's any bumps in the road at all, the more leverage and the more risk you put into this project, the more risk of there being a bump in the road and it wiping you out completely, even if the fundamental decision was a correct one. Be this, say, a mortgage taken out on rental or commercial property, or even for as a business buying, say, a piece of factory equipment. If the cost of it is so high, even if the money eventually comes, the cost of the financing of the product may be so egregious that it just doesn't add up. So you want to be very mindful of particularly things like leverage or adding extra risk or high interest rates on things, because the reality is that if there is ever a pullback in the markets, and pullbacks aren't just something that unfortunately happens, they're basically built in, that over time the psychology in the market means that there will be pullbacks. It's pretty much guaranteed, not if, but when that happens, you want to make sure that that doesn't wipe you out. The next saying is that time in the market beats time in the market. The story of this I've got is one of personal experience where I decided to sell some stocks in my personal accounts just before the general election, when Theresa May was replaced with Boris Johnson. I thought that the Labour Party rather, were going to win the general election that night, but then when they didn't, the stocks that I'd sold were up about 9 to 10% the next day. And that taught me two things, which is one, you should just keep and hold and buy in over time. Buy every month and just hold and let compounding do the work, because the reality is that you don't just have to be right once, you have to be right twice. And if you're off, you might lose 10 or 20% like I did once, and it's something I'll never repeat again. And it also taught me the risk of having echo chambers. So pretty much everyone that I talked to at the time was and are Labour voters, and a lot of my social media, Facebook, so everyone was convinced that they were going to win. And it taught me about the risks of having echo chambers, and I've worked and try to work hard to try and make sure that I don't have an echo chamber anymore by trying to listen to a more broad set of people on things. The next thing I have is that the best investment is the one that you can stick with, because the reality is that, technically speaking, from a mathematical perspective, a 100% global equity portfolio will have a better performance than a 60-40 spread with equities to bonds, because over time stocks do better than bonds historically. However, if you're the kind of person who sees a few red days, a massive drawback, say 20-30% correction in stocks, and would sell, you're locking in losses at the worst possible time. And then by the time the market's recovered, you may be buying at a massive premium. You've lost out on a lot of recovery. And remember that recoveries are not asymmetric. So if you lost, say, 50% on the stock market, you don't need the market to go back up 50% to recover. You need it to double again. So if you sold and bought back in when it was a bit higher, you don't just need to recover a little bit, you need to recover more than you lost. So at the moment, I'm very aggressive, but I'm conscious that as I have more to lose and I get closer to having an amount of money that I could potentially live on for the rest of my life, I will want to dial back the risk eventually, because of things like risk capacity, and also that whole idea of once you've won the game, it becomes important as well about whether or not you can sleep at night, rather than necessarily getting the best outright return. The next thing I've got is one that I absolutely love. The first time I saw it was it's on the floor in Newcastle near Gray's Monument, and it is that the past is my present to your future. And it doesn't quite work this way, but basically the way I've interpreted it is that you want to make things that this present will be your past in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time. And you want to make decisions now that you'll be happy with now and your future self will be happy with. It makes me think of, there's a How I Met Your Mother episode where every single time they make a decision, he keeps going like, damn it, past me, or what have you. And I very consciously was like, I don't want to do that. I want to make decisions that make myself happy now, but also happy in the future. And that involves sacrificing a little bit of today, investing it in the hopes of a better tomorrow. The last phrase I want to talk about is don't drive around your wealth. This is the idea that a lot of people, especially when they're starting out and they don't have much net worth, will buy a car that is depreciating massively, and it might even reach the point that the amount that car is depreciating per day is a really high percentage of your take-home pay. So in terms of your net worth, you might actually be losing money by going to work in a weird way, because you've put so much of your money into this depreciating asset. So again, I want to be able to spend and make money, not just drive it around. Thank you for watching this video. There are loads of phrases, particularly from people like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who I love, and particularly Charlie Munger's work. I might cover those two specifically in a different video. Thank you.